recording. Yes, hello everybody. Welcome to this conference, and I'm saying hello to our four guests from abroad. First of all, our speaker, Professor Sirussi, who is in the United States now. Hello, good morning, Edwin. It's 9 o'clock. Thank you for getting up so early.
My pleasure.
Then we have Jascha Nemtsov. You're in Berlin now, right?
Yes, I'm at home in Berlin.
Yeah. Welcome.
Thank
we
you.
have our second speaker, Hervé Rotten from Paris. Welcome.
Hello, welcome.
And Yuval Shaket. I don't know where he is now. Are you in Pardas Khana or already in Germany?
In my room.
In your room. Okay. So, hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm very happy to announce now our Vice President Jan-Philipp Sprick, who will say some words as a greeting. Hello, Jan. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Reinhard, for the introduction. And first of all, welcome to the participants and also to the audience of the conference on Jewish music in Hamburg. I warmly welcome you to this conference, even in these politically extraordinarily difficult times, in times of great fear, in times of difficulty to maintain hope and the presence of the violence of war on the European continent. And I think it's all the more important to remain in conversation, not to stop now, but especially to continue, especially the scientific discourse or academic discourse, to maintain the international encounter. And it was in your introduction, Reinhard, already visible, or we can experience this, that we are sitting here connected all over the world through our technical devices, but I think we are together in this horror that we are facing right now here in Europe. And the scientific view of the world is one in which abstraction and differentiation are necessary, in which questions are asked and in which we must live with the fact that there are often no simple answers. And the preservation of this culture is particularly important in these days and can offer us a sense of international support of a scientific community in a situation that at the same time seemingly makes us despair. I wanted just to say this in advance before I want to welcome you, despite the online format, to the virtual Hochschule für Musik und Theater in Hamburg. I don't know who of you had the chance before this conference to be in Hamburg in real physical presence. We have around 1,300 students. It's one of the largest artistic universities in Germany and offers artistic and academic training in all areas of music and theater. And the special thing is, like some other schools in Germany, we, in addition to this traditional music and theater training, we have renowned institutes for music therapy and music and media management and culture management. In addition to artistic education, the research areas play an increasingly important role at our Hochschule, as evidenced by a variety of research topics and projects in the areas of musicology, music theory, music technology, and music education. In this canon of academic subjects in our school, musicology plays an important role as a discipline that connects many areas in the university. And as you may know, we have two doctoral programs at our school. One, it's a classical academic doctoral program like a PhD. And we also have for some time now, and as one of the first schools in Germany, also a doctoral program where you can do artistic research work. And we are currently also developing these two programs and We are also in touch with other schools, both nationally and internationally, especially in the area of artistic research. This importance of research, and especially this important role that I already described of musicology, includes a strong orientation towards interdisciplinary cultural studies, which is an important counterpoint, in my opinion, to the artistic education that often focuses on immanent musical processes. Even when you learn an instrument, when you're composing, when you do music theory, you are very focused on these very detailed musical processes, whether you're practicing or composing or whatever, analyzing. And I think to have this broader cultural perspective is extremely important, and it's difficult to relate these two areas to each other. But I'm especially thankful to my esteemed colleague, Professor Reinhard Flender, who brings this perspective to our university all the time. And this conference today is also an example for this. And so I'm very grateful to him and his team for this, and of course, especially for the initiative and organization of this international and high-profile conference. It's a great honor for our university that you have all accepted the invitation and that you contribute to this conference program today and over the next 2 days. To all of you, and especially to you, dear Reinhard, I also like to convey my great thanks on behalf also of the President, Professor Elmar Lamson, and the governing board of the Hochschule. The theme of the conference is so interesting and timely because it addresses and sheds new light on issues that are both unknown and at the same time very present for Hamburg's musical history. In the context of the federal government's celebrations of 1,700 years of Jewish life in Germany as a whole, and the decision of the Senate of the Free and Hanseatic city of Hamburg to rebuild the Great Synagogue, the history of Jewish life in Germany in general and in Hamburg in particular has once again become more prominent than it already was. Against this background, the occasion of the conference to make the history of Jewish music in Hamburg as a subject of discussion cannot be valued highly enough, in that it brings to mind once again things that were apparent certainties for Hamburg's musical life in the post-war period. For example, the Großer Sendesaal of the Norddeutsche Rundfunk, today it's called Rolf Liebermann Studio, was originally a synagogue that was converted into a concert hall with a recording studio by the Norddeutsche Rundfunk after the Rundfunk purchased the building in the Oberstraße, not far from the Hochschule. Since 2000, the former Studio 10 has been renamed after former state opera director Rolf Liebermann, who was of Jewish descent and is, as we will hear as well in this conference, a strong and very important promoter of contemporary music, and in this capacity, a very important figure of musical life in Hamburg after the Second World War. Looking at the conference program, one realizes that research on Jewish music encompasses a wide variety of methods, from cultural history to ethnomusicology, music history, music theory, and that musicology by its very subject matter, especially when you look into this very complex phenomenon of Jewish music and also the biographies, discussions of Jewish musicians in Europe and across all over the world, it calls by his subject for a multi-perspective view, and therefore shows the enormous influence of Jewish music and Jewish musicians on European music history. In this sense, I wish all of you and the participants and the other people who follow the conference a successful conference and fruitful discussions and new knowledge in this extremely interesting area of study. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jan Philipp Strick, and congratulations for being elected our future president and I wish you all good luck. And I'm sure musicology will be in good hands during your new job.
Thank you.
Now I would like to introduce our first lecturer, Professor Edwin Rossi. Well, we have studied together in Jerusalem in 1977, and so we know each other for quite a long time. And Edwin published in 1996 a book on in the very nice Yuval monograph series that is published by Hebrew University on Spanish Portuguese synagogue music in the 19th century, reform sources from Hamburg, ancient tradition in the dawns of modernity. And since that year, it was in my brain, in my head, that we should absolutely make a conference here in Hamburg about this subject. And there were so much other things going on, so I didn't have the time. And I'm very grateful to the Hochschule that they call it a kind of sabbatical for my last year, and I could dedicate myself to this very important subject that should be listened to and heard in Hamburg. And I hope that this will be the beginning of ties that can be connected to the city of Hamburg, especially in the perspective that the big synagogue in the Bornplatz, the Bornplatz, will be reconstructed. I think, well, Jewish music research takes time, but it becomes better and better. To introduce Edwin Rossi, he is the director of the Jewish Music Research Center at the Hebrew University, and to name all his prizes he won, it would take another hour. So I would prefer to just name two very special prizes he won: the Israel Prize in 2018. I mean, this is kind of the Nobel Prize you can win in Israel for your musicological studies. Engel Prize in 2017, and so on and so on. So we have a very prominent guest, and as I said, good morning, Edwin. You're now during a sabbatical in the United States, and just have woken up, and we are really eager to hear your lecture.
Thank you, Reinhard. Thank you so much. Thank you for this invitation. Thank you for Professor Spricht for your kind introduction. It's an honor for me to open this event. My lecture will be accompanied by a PowerPoint presentation. So with your permission, I will move into the presentation. Reinhard was kind enough to invite me to speak on the basis of that book that I wrote back almost 30 years ago. And after we decided on the topic, I went back to my notes, to my archive in my computer, and I realized that I can open this conference with something a little bit wider in scope than to speak only about the phenomenon of the Portuguese Jews in Hamburg. And this is why I changed, with your permission, Reinhard, the title of the conference. I hope I am not breaking the protocol. And I will explain what this title means. What I found in my archive, in my computer archive, is that 17 years ago, a colleague from Hamburg asked me to write an article on Jewish music in Hamburg. I don't remember the name of the lady, I couldn't find it, but I found my notes of what I intended to write. I never wrote the article, and she was not very happy with me for not keeping up to my promise. But this is one of many promises that I broke because I never have enough time to write all what I would like to write. So I am glad that 15 years after, I have the opportunity to write the article online. At least it will be in YouTube with some of the ideas. I will respect my promise to Reinhard to speak about the Portuguese Jews, but I will expand, with your permission, the scope of the lecture. And you see in my title that I'm speaking about the Jewish-German musical encounters in Hamburg. And beyond the Sephardic mystique, it's a concept that I would like to explore with you. I wrote that book based on what I call the attraction of otherness. The book on the Portuguese Jews in Hamburg was based on a very small manuscript from the Birnbaum collection. The Birnbaum collection of Jewish music is located today at the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, but originally is from Königsberg, not far away from Hamburg. And this document attracted my attention when I had the privilege to be working on the collection 40 years ago with my mentor and teacher, Professor Israel Adler. This is the way the manuscript look. I will get back to the manuscript in a few minutes. The attraction of the otherness is what explains the concept of beyond the Sephardic mystique. This is the book that Reinhard mentioned, and I will get back also to the picture in the middle, which is very significant. The Sephardic mystique refers, first of all, to a foundational article about the influence that the image or the imagination of Sephardic Jewry meant to the scholars, German Jewish scholars of Wissenschaft des Judentums in the 19th century. I am only bringing you here two out of the relatively recent books written about this subject. When I wrote my book 30 years ago, the subject was not yet as developed as it is today. What this means is that German Jewry, particularly the elites, sort of projected their aspirations to integration in German society on the basis of the integration of the Jews in medieval Spain, in medieval Al-Andalus. Of course, there is a naive side to this perspective, an ahistorical vision of the past, but you know, the past is usable, and some of these ideas penetrated deeply into the work of the people in Wissenschaft des Judentums, particularly in their interest, deep interest in Sephardic literature. And of course, in Hamburg, the situation was special because the Ashkenazi or the German Jewish intellectuals had just on the other side of the street some of the remnants of this Sephardic Jewry. The research on the Portuguese Jews in Hamburg, Altona, and I mention Altona because today is an integral part of Hamburg, but in the past was the other side of the river. And the history of German Jewry in Hamburg since the 16th century is a history that the more I studied is all the time about crossing the river. It's depending on the different political situations in the city of Hamburg itself, The Jews were allowed, not allowed. They were allowed to work, but not to have property. Sometimes they were allowed to have property. Sometimes they had to be buried on the other side of the river. So this constant lack of stability is what defines the Jewish experience in Hamburg. And the fascination that scholars have with this very small community, as you will see, is represented here. Just a very brief bibliography of a much larger bibliography on this phenomenon. I think that if you take per capita, there is much more written, 100 times more written about Portuguese Jews than Ashkenazi Jews in Hamburg. Particularly, I want to mention the name of my dear colleague, Michael Studemunda Levy, who has dedicated practically his whole corpus of scholarly research to the Sephardic Jews in northern Germany. What do we know about the music of these Portuguese Jews? Remember, the Portuguese Jewish settlement starts at the beginning of the 17th century to pick up. And in 1763, that is to say about more than 100 years of Jewish presence in Hamburg-Altona, we have a magnificent document written by Jacob ben Joseph Acohen Belinfante, who was the cantor at this community. This is our first tangible evidence of musical information that we have from Hamburg. And this is his book, Mesilat Beit Israel, and this book is what we call in Jewish studies Seder Hazanut. Seder Hazanut is the order of prayers, not the liturgy performed in the synagogue, but in a way the manual that the cantor has as to how to proceed and how to do and how to perform the liturgy. And as you see, you have a beautiful decoration, simply because Belinfante was not only a musician, but he was also an artist, a visual artist. And this is one of the most beautiful manuscripts from Hamburg today at the Venzvi Institute in Jerusalem. And Mesilat Beit Israel is the name of the book because Beit Israel was the name of the Portuguese congregation. And I'll translate it for you what he says here in the short introduction in the title page. This book or this manuscript includes the traditional order of prayers for the whole year, melodies, nigunim, and praises from the last generations and from the early ones according to the Sephardic tradition of the Holy Congregation Beit Israel in Hamburg. It's written Hamburg here in the middle in big letters, Hamburgo, as you say that in Portuguese. And he gives, of course, praise to his father, who was still alive when he wrote this manuscript. Now, what does he mean by melodies? Well, this is what he means. He has, at the end of the manuscript, a list of melodies to be performed in the different parts of the liturgy. He doesn't bring musical notation, regretfully, so we can only guess what he had in mind when he wrote this part of the manuscript. You see here, I just choose one of the pages, Nigunim LeKaddish, that is to say, melodies that you can apply to the Kaddish. The Kaddish is the most recurring Jewish text in the Jewish liturgy. It's like the marker of the different parts of the liturgy, so every section ends with Kaddish, or is marked by the Kaddish, and the cantors have many melodies to perform this text. One of the melodies that we have here, just a second, it's a melody שהיו נוהגים לשורר בליל פסח באמסטרדם והיא מוקדמת עד מאוד. It is one of the melodies that they used to sing in the eve of Passover in Amsterdam, and it is a very ancient melody. So here we have, in a nutshell, the strong connection between cantors from Hamburg and from Amsterdam. Amsterdam is like the mother community of the Portuguese Jews. I assume that Hervé is going to talk more about that. So we see here the transfer of melodies from Amsterdam to Hamburg, the historical consciousness of a melody as being ancient. Now, not all the melodies were ancient. Here we have another melody, שחידש המשורר אורלי בוסקי בטובעי. That is to say, a new melody, not an old one, but a new one, that the composer, he calls him a meshorer, but he was a composer, Orly Busky wrote, and it is a very good one, a very nice melody. So we know to whom he is referring. He is referring to Konrad Friedrich Urlebusch, one of the fashionable composers of Amsterdam at the time, of which the Jews of Amsterdam knew his music, and they were able to borrow from his music and set up a melody for a Jewish Kaddish. Let's listen to a few bars of how the music of Urlebusch sounded, and then a real example, a real reconstruction of how this Kaddish may have been. I'm sorry. First of all, we can say that this type of music is the type of music that you could hear in a reception of the rich mansions of the Portuguese Jews in Amsterdam in the mid-18th century. Probably Urlebusch even performed in one of these big sumptuous mansions of the Portuguese merchant elite in Amsterdam. Some of these Kaddishim, some of these melodies were preserved in manuscripts in Amsterdam, and I will play for you a reconstruction of one of these Kaddishim performed by Chazan Jonathan Schutz. At the time, he was a student from the Jewish Theological Seminar in New York, in Jerusalem, a student of my wife, and we recorded some of these Kaddishim to which Belinfante is mentioning, and I will play it for you. Of course, the Kaddish is performed without musical accompaniment.
Israel ba'agala ובזמן קריב ואמרו Amen. Amen.
So a little taste of what you could hear if you came to Belinfante's esnoga. That's the word, the Portuguese name for synagogue in Hamburg in the mid 18th century. Since when do we have some tangible information directly from Hamburg? Well, here you have in front of you one of the first documents that we have with musical notation from Hamburg. This is a Kaddish. Once again, the Kaddish, a very important prayer, de la primera noche de cabañas. That is to say, as you can see, for the Esther Lounghüttenabend, for the celebration of Sukkot. And here you have a very elaborate piece that appeared in the Allgemeine Zeitung des Judentums. These transcriptions were prepared by Yehuda Casuto, who at the time was the cantor in Hamburg. And I want to show you, just from some of my other studies, that this Kaddish is basically a Baroque elaboration of a very simple melody from Amsterdam that you have here in the second line of this first system. This is a melody called the El Elim. It was very famous in Amsterdam in the 18th century, and the cantors used to elaborate using Baroque ornamentation in the synagogue. What is interesting is that this Baroque style still pervades in the Portuguese synagogue in the 19th century. Well into the Romantic period, we still have in the synagogue this Baroque type of ornamentation. Regretfully, I don't have the time to perform this, but you can find this in some other studies I have done on the Portuguese music from Hamburg. Here you have one of the important synagogues, Portuguese synagogues. This is the one on the Altona side, the Neve Shalom synagogue. It was closed in 1882, where there were no more enough Portuguese Jews to maintain it. It was used by the Ashkenazi community for a while as a study house. Here we have the Beit Israel Esnoga in Hamburg. This is the Esnoga, the synagogue that was established that was constructed, the new one, in 1855. And this is from a picture, a very rare picture of the synagogue. We have very, very few visualizations of this synagogue from an article on Ostum West of 1905. And this article is important for me because it celebrates, it's an article by Dr. Paul Rieger of Hamburg, celebrating the Jubiläum der Hamburger Portugiesen Gemeinde. In 1905, the synagogue celebrated 50 years of its existence, this new synagogue. But the attitude of Dr. Rieger is extremely what we call lachrymose. Look at what he, first of all, he mentions all the Portuguese Jews, and I just found nicely that he mentioned the Zeichner Jacob Belinfante. So you see the name of Belinfante was well known from these elaborated illustrated manuscripts. But look what he writes. Ist doch die ganze Geschichte dieser letzten portugiesischen Gemeinde auf deutschem Boden ein Lied vom Sterben. And finally he says, wie lange noch? Und in dem stimmungsvollen Betthause der Portugiesin verstummen die uralten, selbststam anmutenden Melodien, deren schwerblütige Akkorde vermutliche Träumereien und überernste Erinnerungen an die ruhmreichen Tage Israels auf dem Pyrenäischen Halbinsel auslösen. So we see here basically a very sad realization that this community is about to fade out, and the melodies plays such an important role in the fading out of this community. With this, I end the chapter on the Portuguese Jews, and I will move quickly into other aspects of Jewish music in Hamburg. But the first one is still related to the Portuguese Jews, to the Sephardic musical mystique. Reform Judaism finds in Hamburg its first stage that pervaded, that continued until the 20th century. The first Reformed temple founded in 1818 in Hamburg is the only one who survived the early attempts of reform in Berlin, were all the time being sabotaged by the Orthodox community. In Hamburg, the reform succeeded, and here we have the great temple in Pulstrasse, and here we go back to the Birnbaum collection, Mus'ad 14. So what we have here is a fantastic development in which the Reform movement, seeking for the most authentic Jewish music they could find, while trying to move away from the old Ashkenazi German tradition, they simply engage the local Portuguese cantor. And the organist that was employed by the synagogue, Mr. Bethuel, he was the organist of the chief church in Hamburg. He transcribed from the cantor some of the traditional Sephardic melodies and arranged them for performance with keyboard accompaniment. I cannot go into the details of all this amazing development of the inclusion of very old Sephardic musical traditions into the Reform movement from all synagogues. However, I want to tell you that these are the oldest tangible evidence we have of Sephardic music in the whole history of Sephardic music. The first time we have a musical notation. I choose for you one piece, Ya Shema Evyonecha, which it's, in my opinion, one of the oldest Sephardic melodies. We have so much evidence, and the evidence that is so old is not because we have this in this manuscript, which is from about 1827, but it continues in oral tradition. My work was to sing all these melodies to Sephardic cantors living today, and they recognize all these melodies. That is to say that the transcription was accurate enough to be recognized also by Sephardic cantors in the 20th and 21st century. So you see the melody, la ri ra ra ri ra ri ra ri, la ri ra ra ri ra ri ra ri, la 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 ra ri ra ra ri, la ra 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 ra. Let's hear how this poem by the great Yehuda Halevi, the great medieval Sephardic Spanish Hebrew poet, that is performed in the Sephardic ritus, in the Sephardic liturgy for Mincha, for the afternoon prayers of Yom Kippur. Here you have the choir of the Portuguese community in London performing this piece, this melody. I'm sorry I have to cut all these beautiful performances for the sake of time. Here you have another page of the same manuscript, the melody for Etz Chaim Il Amachzikim Ba from the Torah service. And once again, here we have an interesting melody that is used in Ashkenazi communities until this very day. You have all this information and deep analysis in my book. But the strong man in the Hamburg temple in the first Reformed Jewish community in Hamburg was Edward Clay, who was the preacher there for the formative years of the community, a very distinguished leader of the Reform movement in Germany. And he tried to transform the entire liturgy. In my opinion, Clay was not one of the most enthusiastic promoters of the Portuguese strategy, musical strategy. I think that I have to put the Portuguese influence on the Reform movement into a more limited influence. However, Edward Clay had other ideas about how music in the synagogue, the new music for the temple should sound like. He wrote many texts of many anthems, many poems. The music was published several years later in Kassel in 1832 in this book called the Kol Zimra in Hebrew, Gesänge zur Entdeckung der Andacht und der religiösen Gefühls by the Israelitische Jugend. And here you have what the music that Clay thought that is proper for the new synagogue, a real Lutheran chorale, four-voice chorale with the texts written by him. Here you have Herr, nun dir allein vertrauen. This is one of Clay's most famous anthems. So we have here, on the one hand, the Sephardic mystique, the use of very ancient Sephardic tunes vis-a-vis this Lutheran model of musical Bildung, of musical decorum, of participation of the entire congregation, particularly the youth, in the singing of the synagogue. The Portuguese melodies did not remain within the confines of the Hamburg Reform congregation. It was taken out to other Reform congregations throughout Germany. Here we have Hirsch Goldberg's Gesänge für Synagogen, Braunschweig 1843. My picture is from the Zweite Auflage of 1845. And you see here one of the most ancient liturgical structures of textual structures, not only musical. Adonai Melech, Adonai Malach, Adonai Imloch Leolam Va'ed. God is the king, God was the king, God will be the queen forever and ever. And the performance here is between the Chazan and the Chor. So what we have is one musical phrase, la ra ri ra ra ra, la ra ri ra ra ra, da ra ra, li ra ra, la ra 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 ra, ri ra ra. 4 different sections, and then the Chazan have a recitative, and the choir responds each time with one of these short phrases. This is one of the most entrenched moments of the Jewish liturgy that remain forever. I just decided to play for you a recording. This is not a field recording. This is a YouTube recording of Selichot, of the early morning service of the month of Elul, in which you can hear the same structure and very similar melodic movement sung in a totally different style in Israel just a couple of years ago. you can hear exactly the same pattern. You see here the continuity, the power of the continuity of oral memory in one of the most sacred moments of the Jewish liturgy. Moving on into who came after the first generation of reform movement in Hamburg, Moritz Henle, one of the most important composers and choir conductors of German Jewish community. He served for a very long time in Hamburg between 1879 and 1913. Henle, you have here a family of the entire dynasty of Henle. Henle came from Laupheim, very, very south parts of Germany, and moved north to a very different environment. I can speak a lot about this picture. We don't have enough time, but I just want to play for you a little bit of how the music by Henle sounded. What Henle did is more or less he wiped out all the Portuguese tunes. He reintroduced the Ashkenazi pronunciation of Hebrew. The early reform adopted the Sephardic pronunciation, the Portuguese pronunciation. Henle made a step back, returning a little bit more to the tradition of the modern Orthodox synagogues of Germany. Let's hear Uvnucho Yomar, just a few bars from Henle's music. I'm sorry again that I have to cut for the sake of time. Another important personality, a little bit less expected perhaps in Hamburg, but an integral part of the soundscape of Jewish Hamburg in the early 20th century. While Henle was still the music Kapellmeister and choir conductor at the Reform Temple, the new Bornplatz synagogue in Hamburg, the Orthodox, hires who is perhaps one of the greatest Ashkenazi cantors of all times, Josel Rosenblatt. And it's important to mention Josel Rosenblatt today because he came from Ukraine. He was originally from Ukraine, and he made little by little his road west. First moving to Vienna to study, then moving to Pressburg, Bratislava as cantor, then moving to Hamburg, and then eventually spending the last time of his life in New York City. Here I found a very nice ketubah, a marriage contract from Hamburg. I found this on the internet on a Sotheby's sale of Jewish documents. What I found it very interesting is that one of the witnesses of this wedding is Yosef ben Moharar Raphael Nero Yair Rosenblatt, Shatz Rishon ve'ed Ne'eman bekelat Kodesh Hamburg. That is to say, Joseph, the son of my teacher and my rabbi, Raphael, may he live a long life, Rosenblatt, Shatz Sheliach Tzibur, that is to say, representative or emissary of the congregation, that is to say, the cantor, Rishon, the first, the main cantor, and Ed Ne'eman, a faithful witness of the Holy Congregation of Hamburg. And in the Bornplatz synagogue. Here you have one of the earliest pictures of the synagogue. While Rosenblatt is there, he records for Odeon Records. So we have his voice at the time he is in Hamburg. Let's listen to Veshamru and pay attention to the style of Rosenblatt during this time. By the way, look at the way he looks here. He gained a lot of weight in America. Many people become more fat in America. And he also doesn't have at this time the thick glasses that he has in all his pictures in America. He looks very decorous, very German in a way, even though he has this big beard. And the voice also is the voice of an educated cantor, not the explosive tenor voice virtuoso that we will hear in later periods. This is Veshamru, as you may have heard Rosenblatt singing in Hamburg in 1908. Sorry that I have to interrupt this amazing recording, 1908, Rosenblatt in Hamburg. Another important figure, the successor of Henle, Leon Kornitzer. Professor Yasha Nemtsov is going to give an entire lecture on him, so I won't say anything except that he was another towering and important figure in the Hamburg scene at the beginning of the 20th century. I will just mention that Leon Kornitzer's important collection of Jewish songs, Jüdische Klange, published in Hamburg in 1933, has our Adonai Melech, the same piece I played for you a few minutes before. But here, he doesn't say it's a Portuguese tune. It's simply a Hamburger Weise. So we see that still in 1933, there were echoes in Hamburg of the Portuguese tradition. I will end to mention something outside the Jewish musical culture, outside the synagogue. Not all Jewish musical culture is synagogue music. There is music in Jewish life, in the Jewish home, in the Jewish community centers, and in this case, in the Jewish youth movements, which was a very important component of the Jewish experience in Germany, particularly during the Weimar Republic. The Jewish youth movements were developed across the lines of the Wandervogel, the German youth movements, with a lot of trips to nature and a lot of idealistic views being transmitted in these groups. Hamburg had a very important part in this history of youth movements, and an important part in the music. You know, singing together during camps was a very important activity, and the songs that were performed were in many cases collected and put in songsters. So here you have Joseph Yola Jacobsen, the very mythical conductor of school choirs in Hamburg. And this photo was taken by Rabbi Zev Walter Gotthold. And I mentioned the memory of Rabbi Gotthold because I had the honor of have met him in person and talked to him about music in Hamburg before the war. This is the only picture I could find of Dr. Rabbi Gotthold. He was a member of the orchestra, and he was an ethnographer, an ethnomusicologist. He helped in this very important publication of Hamburg, what I call the last salvo of Hamburg German Jewish musical intersection. Havana Shira, this is a songster. You can see how the songs look. I don't have the time to go now into the visual aspects of this songster, which are incredible. Here you have a song for children, a very simple song. You see the German translation, and you see who wrote the song, no less than Abraham Zvi Edelsong. So Havana Shira auf Lasst uns singen is a collection, a pamphlet of so many musical sources. I will end then my presentation. By the way, the songster was republished, reprinted in Hamburg in 2001 in a beautiful commented edition, a facsimile edition, and this was an amazing, how do you say, memorialization of the Jewish youth in Hamburg before the war. Rabbi Gotthold, in a document, unpublished document of the National Library of Israel, writes about his experience in preparing these songsters. And I'm quoting from a quote in an article about by Michael Beckerman and Naomi Tatmor, published in Music and Politics a few years ago. And this is Rabbi Gotthold's memory of this book, Havana Shira. This songbook documents the desire of Jews to remain part of a German cultural life. German folk songs, Hebrew dance melodies, and religious songs stand cheek by jowl in the collation. The editors wanted to integrate various cultures without excluding the song because of its outward appearance. With insight, this cultural political myopia might be ascribed to an attitude still obsessed with the Weimar spirit. He's referring here to the inclusion of very nationalist German songs, student songs from the medieval period, etc. It must seem strange nowadays that such an educationally motivated cultural policy should have been considered justifiable after the Nazi takeover and the exclusion of Jews from German cultural life. Remember, Havana Shira is published in 1935, 2 years after Hitler came to power. From this point of view, Havana Shira is an extraordinary historical document. At the same time, we felt that we could justify our pride and determination in this context by viewing our cultural balancing act as a symbolic fusion of Judaism and the German spirit. Thank you very much.
We will continue our conference with the lecture of Hervé Rotten. He founded the European Institute of Jewish Music in 2006, which goes back to an initiative to our common teacher, Israel Adler, which was already mentioned by Edwin Serossi. Israel Adler was the founder of modern Jewish Jewish music research, and he founded the association Yuval in Paris for the research of Jewish music in France. And well, you took his succession and you built up this wonderful institute. You count 90,000 audio files in your archive, and you're a specialist on digitizing, disseminating archives, so that helps. And 160,000 pages of scores. I have to say, while we were preparing this seminar with our students, your site was very helpful for them to find a lot of examples, klezmer, which is very popular among here in my students here in Hamburg. And it is accessible in 4 languages. I don't know how you do it in French, German, English, and Spanish. Your dissertation, you wrote your dissertation on Jewish Portuguese traditions in France, and you were, Israel Adler was actually drawing you into the field of Jewish music research. And this is also your lecture today. This community, very wealthy community that has been expulsed from the Spanish Peninsula and spread all over Europe. Amsterdam, we mentioned Amsterdam, but you will now talk about France.
Okay, thank you very much. So you quote Israel Adler, and I have to add Frank Alvarez Pereira and Simra Rom. Simra Rom, which is a real brilliant ethnomusicologist, and I was very proud to study with him too, so I have to quote his name. Just for the story, when I met Israel Adler, it was in 89, so it's a long time ago, and I met Edwin too. I remember in this period, I was a young student, and after when I returned in France, in Paris, where Israel Adler was just founded an association named Yuval. It was a French association for the Jewish preservation of Jewish musical heritage. He showed me a lot of recordings. It was some tapes. It was perhaps 100 or 150 tapes on a corner of the room, and I asked him, "What is the contents of this recording?" And he told me, "We just recorded them in Bordeaux and in Bayonne with Frank Alvarez Pereira, and nobody has worked on that on them. And if you are interested, you can perhaps make your PhD on the subject." And I did not know anything about the Portuguese communities, the music of the Portuguese community, and in fact, I did not know anything about Jewish music. So it was a way to go in the subject and to make a real work which lasts 7 years. So it was a long time, really a long time, and I was very lucky to have a lot of different matters, recording, musical manuscripts, a lot of people that I recorded which were still alive, but it was, and I would say it was the end of this tradition, because as Edwin Cerisi told, now in Bordeaux and in France, there are very few people originating from the Judeo-Portuguese community now. Really, a very few. So I think it was a very important work. And of course, when we talked together with Reinhard about this lecture, I could not speak about all of that musical history, which is absolutely fascinating. But we decided to point more on the turn of the 19th century, with all the changes due to the introduction of the Western musical notation and the introduction of instruments like the organ in the worship. So I will, of course, I will speak very briefly about the history of the two communities, but it won't be the main point of my lecture. So if you allow me, I will now go to the PowerPoint. It is not very original, but it's very practical, a PowerPoint to hear a musical example. So just a minute. Okay. Okay, and so as quite Edwin told us, everything began with the expulsion of the Sephardic communities in 1492 and from the Portugal of 1497. And we can see here the different towns where the Sephardic Portuguese settled. And it was in Bayonne. It was just, Bayonne is really near from Spain, Bordeaux. And this, at this period...
On voit pas, Hervé.
Ah,
tu es pas sur la première, deuxième image, là. On est toujours sur la première.
Ah, ouais. Je sais pas pourquoi. Just a minute. Why? Diffuser le diaporama. No. Just a minute. Okay, I don't know why. It was good. You can see now?
Ouais.
But why did...
Mais on n'a pas la pleine image, tu vois.
Il n'y a pas la pleine image.
Ouais.
So, okay, I will do like that. Okay, if you can see like that, it's good. So you can see the travel of the Jews, or in fact the Marranos, which were fleeing the Spanish Inquisition. They arrive in Bayonne, Bordeaux, and then a little in La Rochelle, Nantes, but they don't remain any Jews there. And after, of course, Amsterdam, which, as Edwin told, which was the mother of all the Sephardic Portuguese community, because they were allowed to return to the Judaism in Amsterdam. Don't forget it, because in Bayonne and Bordeaux, they have to remain new Christian. And from Amsterdam, of course, to Hamburg, or to Antwerp, or to London. Okay. So it's important to where is located Bayonne and Bordeaux, because I will speak a lot of these two towns, and of course Paris, because after a lot of Portuguese Jews settled in Paris. So a brief historical overview. Since the middle of the 16th century, the southwest of France has sheltered Spanish Portuguese communities. And as I told you, they were called New Christians. They were accepted not as Jews, but at a New Christian, but their official name was the Portuguese nation. And they were allowed by the king to settle in the southwest of France. And my lecture will attempt to study the evolution of their musical liturgy and practices after the introduction of Western musical notation of choirs and instruments at the beginning of the 19th century. How did the Spanish Portuguese Jews reorganize their musical liturgy? Who were the main actors, it means composer or arrangers of that reform? What impact had those changes on the evolution of oral tradition and its transmission modalities? We also consider the relation between oral and written tradition. It was a point which was very interesting I really think, in my work, because of all the documents that I have. I could have more than 150 years, perhaps. I had some documents at the beginning of the 19th century and recording from the 1986, 87. So it's more or less 200 years. And it was very interesting to compare all the version of the same prayer. It means oral or written version, monodic or polyphonic version, over that long period. And finally, I will focus on the role of the organ in the development of the new French synagogue worship and the controversy surrounding the introduction of this instrument. And we will find, of course, some questions which were evoked by Edwin Cerruti in his lecture. So, to be brief, the story of the Sephardic Portuguese Jews in France is divided into two main periods. From about 1550, first date of arrival of the Marranos to the southwestern France, up to 1790, these new Christians went from a secret Jewish life to a organized one. But it was, of course, very progressive. During the 16th, and they really have to be Christians. The wedding was at the church, and they are really Marranos. They don't have to show any Jewish practice. After that, from the 17th to the 80s, they began to be more emancipated. And at the 18th century, everybody knew that they were Jews. And arrived the period of the French Revolution. And it's very interesting to know that the Portuguese Jews were emancipated by the revolution 1 year before the Ashkenazic Jews from France. It means that they were, of course, more integrated in the French society of that time. They were already totally integrated. And the second period, from 1790 until now, marks the rising of the two communities during the 19th century, and a lot of musical practices. I will speak a lot about their practice, and we will hear musical example. And after, unfortunately, their decline during the 20th. So you can see here the Bayonne synagogue at the end of the 19th century. So let us go at the beginning of the 19th century, where at this period, the French Jewish community began to put its liturgical practice in order on the model of Christian worship. In 1808, the consistory reform of Napoleon I introduced many changes in the new Israelite worship and music, including the creation of male choirs and the occasional introduction of instruments. The first circumstances where we can see this new change were the inaugurations of the synagogue of Bordeaux in 1812 and in Bayonne in 1817. And this inauguration gave rise to sumptuous ceremonies in which men's and children's choirs sang a new musical repertoire reshaped for the occasion. The Bordeaux and Bayonne choirs, we have a lot of testimonies of this ensemble, and they were composed of about 20 men, sometimes reinforced by about 10 child chorists. There were also no women at this time, just men and children, but boys. And between 1812 and 1888, according to the years and the ceremonies, the choir of Bordeaux counted between 14 and 45 singers, so it's a big choir. Bayonne's choir is roughly the same size. In the middle of the 19th century, it comprised 23 men and 16 choir children dressed in a ceremonial dress provided by the community, so it was very solemn. And they sang generally at 3, 4, or 5 voices, most of the time a cappella. On particular occasion, like weddings, inauguration of a synagogue, integration of a new rabbi, official ceremonies, the choir was accompanied by a small ensemble of string or wind instruments or by an harmonium. Only certain parts of the service were sung by the choir. Most traditional prayers remained as they were in the past. It means sung a cappella by the chazan and or the congregation. Let me see you just a picture of the banquet of the choir of the synagogue of Bordeaux. It's a very interesting picture. It was taken in 1910, and you can see the choir, and here is Salomon Foy, who wrote a very interesting a collection of score about Portuguese tunes which were sung in Bordeaux. And it's we have testimonies of the musical practice in the book of Henri Léon, Histoire des Juifs de Bayonne, which was published in 1893. And he's giving a very striking description of the new consistorial service in Bayonne at the end of the 19th century. Let me quote what he is writing. We then felt one day the need to write the traditional tunes in order to teach them musically, and we also composed new ones. They were borrowed from the great master of classical music or from less known composers. A choir was created, harmonizing the various voices of men with those of children. In the temple, and you can see that they say temple, they don't say synagogue. It's absolutely like Edwin Serussi spoke about that. In the temple, when the cantor celebrates the divine service, he recites or sings alone without any vocal or instrumental accompaniment. In certain parts, quite numerous in the prayers, the assembly of worshippers replies along with the traditional tunes begun by the officiant and continued in unison. At determined moment, the children and men who compose the choir rise and gather. The voice of the officiant goes silent, a religious silence occurs, and under the direction of the conductor giving the turn and raising his baton, modern songs are heard, performed with a set and nuances whose perfection gives a particular brilliance to the sometimes austere celebration of religious solemnities. So in this quite long extract, you can see the changes of the musical practices. It's introduced, it's in new version. This consistorial service is included different forms of song. The majority of the service, psalmody, hymns, and cantillations in particular, is preserved as before. Some prayer or parts of prayers are arranged and harmonized with 4 voices, the upper voice repeating the traditional melody. Tunes are also borrowed from well-known composers such as Haydn and Beethoven. And the text of the prayer is put as best as it can on this melody. And finally, we can find new composition based on an already existing liturgical text or on text written for the occasion. So we can say that conservation, adaptation, borrowing a new composition were at the basis of the reorganization of the Portuguese liturgical chant. Let us speak about the main composers or arrangers of that new musical repertoire. As I told you, it began in 1812 in Bordeaux and 1817 in Bayonne. In Bayonne, we found the original manuscript with a lot of prayers dated from the beginning of that reform. It means really at the beginning of the 19th century. And a man and a musician is always quoted. It is Mr. Cross. We don't know his we don't know his name, his first name. Mr. Cross in Bayonne. He was a teacher of music. He was hired by the community of Bayonne in about 1816, and he was given the mission. He was Christian. He was not Jewish. He was given the mission to make musical transcriptions of many traditional prayers and to harmonize them for 4 voices according to the contemporary style. The traditional tune was as I told you, generally located in the soprano voice. But we can suppose that these melodies were subject to modification, as it was quite impossible to arrange the ancien oral style of synagogal music, which is non-harmonic and unmeasured. Another very important person, this time in Bordeaux, is Jean-Baptiste Auvray. Jean-Baptiste Auvray was a musician, arranger, and modest composer, born around 1775 in the Kingdom of Saxony, so he was coming from Germany. And he settled in Bordeaux and died in Bordeaux in 1840. And the consistory of Bordeaux hired him on several occasions, notably in 1812 for the inauguration ceremony of the new temple of the community, which was located on the Coste Rouge Street. We will see a picture of this new temple. These two composers wrote new melodies, some of which are adopted by the faithful and become traditional. Others, more numerous, sink quickly into oblivion. After that, the musicians enriched the repertoire of Bayonne and Bordeaux congregations. Among them, we can name Paul da Silva, Pollicine Carvalho, Albert Lyon, Alphonse Perpignan, and Léon Adrien Nunes. Émile Jonas is an author of a collection entitled Chants hébraïques, Hebrew songs, performed in the consistorial temples of the Portuguese Rite of Paris. Because in Paris, there were no Jews. You have to remember that from the beginning of the 14th century in France, it was the kings published the prohibition of any Jews on the French kingdom. So there was officially there was no Jews in France until the French Revolution. If we accept the Jews of the Pope, of the Comte-Avenessin near Avignon, where it's a particular case. But in fact, we have the Jews of the southwestern France, which were not officially Jews. And of course, we have the Ashkenazic Jews of Alsace-Lorraine, but I will return to this point after. But a small community of Portuguese Jews began to settle in Paris at the beginning of the 18th century. And it was, of course, to make trading, because as Edwin Serres tells, a lot of Jews, and particularly in Bordeaux and Paris, were involved in international trading. And so in Paris, there was a Jewish community in the 18th. And they were linked, of course, with the Bordeaux community, which was a very important community, the most important Portuguese community in France. And Bayonne was a very important, but more religious, not trading, but more religious. So at the beginning of the 19th, when Napoleon I introduced all its changes with the creation of the consistory, it began, of course, in Paris. Paris was the main city, the first city of the new French Empire. And in Paris, more and more Portuguese Jews settled in Paris, and they founded a new synagogue, a new temple. So Émile Jonas, he wrote for the first the Portuguese community in Paris, and he's a very important composer, and we will hear some tunes that he composed for the Portuguese communities from Paris. But his tunes were so appreciated that they were adopted by the community, of course, of Bordeaux and Bayonne, of all the Portuguese community in France, but also the Ashkenazi community. I will return to this point after. Among this new melody, introduced in the Spanish-Portuguese liturgy of the 19th century, we must therefore mention several borrowing from classical music composers. For example, the hymn, as we can see, Ezrecha, which was composed, it's attributed to the great Rabbi Abraham of Colonia, a member of the great Sanhedrin. And in fact, this prayer was used the music of the Austrian national anthem, Gott erhalte Franz den Kaiser, whose melody comes from a lied by Joseph Haydn. And this lied, composed by Haydn in 1797, was later used in his string quarter named The Emperor. So you can see it's very funny because the Austrian anthem was borrowed by Haydn from his music, and after it was borrowed by the Portuguese Jews and was used for this cantique Ezrecha. Beethoven inspired certain prayer tunes, such as the Himmler, which is sung in Bayern today. And these tunes are now considered as traditional. A lot of faithful, they don't know that they are singing some tunes from Beethoven, some Haydn. It's very interesting. They say it's very old tunes. Sometimes they told me that these tunes were coming from the King David, were coming from the King David. And I remember just one thing. I was listening one of these tunes, and it was Lecha Dodi, which was sung by a very old man from Bayern, and it was like that. Lecha Dodi likrat kala pene Shabbat Shabbat nekabela. And I heard this tune as I was in Jerusalem in the Jewish Music Research Center, and I did not know where this tune, I did not know who composed this tune, or I know that it was not old because the character of the melody was absolutely not old. And Batya Bayer, a musicologist which died a long time ago, she came in the room where I listened to this tune, and she told me, you have this tune, where did you record it? And I told her I recorded in Bayonne. And she told me, but do you know what is this tune? And I answered, no, absolutely not. And she said it was a very common tune in the 17th, and it comes from the Ottoman period. It was played at the Jerusalem souk and the Jerusalem market, and Jews. It was appreciated this tune, and they borrowed the tune, and they use the tune for a lot of prayers, and sometimes for Lecha Dodi. And when they go to the diaspora and they arrive in the community, they were asked to sing a tune which is sung in Jerusalem, in the holy town. And they sing this tune, and after the community learned the tune, and they said, oh, it's a very old tune because it's coming from Jerusalem. But in fact, this tune, it's coming from, it's a Turkish tune. And what is very funny is that Mozart used this tune in his opera L'Enlèvement Serail, die Entführung aus dem Serail, ich glaube. And it's the Janissary March. So you see, as tunes are traveling from one point of the earth to the other, and it's always difficult to know if they are really old or not old. But it will be, I will be focused on this point a little later. So let's, I have too much spoken, and let us listen some music, and I hope it will work. So the first music it was composed by Mr. Krost of Bayonne for the inauguration of the first Bayonne synagogue temple, and it was very interesting and new tunes that we will have now. So as you can hear, this tune totally borrowed the Western musical notation and the Western musical system with the harmony. And this tune is no more sung in Bayonne, and no more in Bordeaux, and no more in any Portuguese synagogue. But it was very interesting. I recorded it with the choir of the Bordeaux synagogue in 20 years ago, because it was on this manuscript. I mean, it was interesting to give these pieces to know how the music was sung at the beginning of the 19th century. The second example is it is taken from a recording which was made in 1955 for the wedding of Denise Léon, which is a sister of Gilbert Léon, which was my main informator, my main, of course, a very known in Bordeaux, because he knows the liturgy, the Portuguese liturgy very well. And it was recording for the wedding. So it's Barou Rabat. It was composed by Alphonse Perpignan. And so let us listen. It's very beautiful. very interesting testimonies on the changes, because this tune was composed in the second half of the 19th century, and you can see the musical style changes. It is more an operatic style, influenced by the music of his time. It was a great time of the opera composers, such Fromental Levy or Offenbach or Emil Jonas, and so a lot of composers wrote synagogue music on this style. And it will be the case for our third example, Teilat Adonai, which was composed by Emil Jonas. Emil Jonas was a very famous composer who was very appreciated by Napoleon III, and he wrote a lot of opera. He fell into oblivion now, but he is very interesting, and you have to discover him again. And we will hear this short example. So you can hear, of course, the organ accompaniment. I will return to this point in a few minutes. Just a few words about the 20th century, because as I told you at the beginning of my lecture, the 20th century marks the rising of the Jewish Portuguese communities, the decline, obviously, the decline of the Jewish Portuguese communities. This community, and in particular, the Jewish population of Bayonne, began slowly to decrease until the Second World War due to the commercial decline of the town. Over the same period, the number of Jews originating from Bordeaux was reduced from 1940 people in year 1900 to about 1200 in 1941. During the Second World War, the 2/3 of the Jewish population, local and refugees alike, were arrested and deported by the Nazis. The Great Synagogue was ransacked in 1944, and it was rebuilt after the war, but most of the worshippers who knew the musical liturgical traditions disappeared. In the 60s, many North African Jews emigrated to Bordeaux and Bayonne, and they saved those communities from death, but at the same time, they brought their own musical traditions. The result is that the Portuguese rite has practically disappeared in Bayonne. In Bordeaux, a sharing of the musical rite has been established. Some prayers are sung in the Spanish-Portuguese tradition, others in the Moroccan or Algerian traditions. And in the Talmud Torah, the children originating from North Africa learn these two rites. It's a sort of musical revival. But due to the fact that only 3 or 4 Jewish Bordelais families are still living in Bordeaux, the repertoire of the Spanish-Portuguese tradition is more and more sung in a North African style, as we will see in a few minutes. By an irony of fate, it is probably in Paris, where a Portuguese synagogue still exists, that the Bordeaux and Bayonne rite is the most faithful to the past. And now let us analyze a pute, a chariot, to see how the influence of the Western musical notation and the relation between orality and notation, between modality and polyphony. It is a very interesting example to understand what happened with all the changes introduced by the consistorial reforms. The pute Echaratzon, it's a Rosh Hashanah pute. It is a versified and metrical religious poetry consisting of 13 stanzas, all built on the same melodic model, except for the first, which has in its beginning a slight melodic variation. We will hear it and we will see, because I made a transcription, a musical transcription. So I had selected 10 versions of this pute, Echaratzon, and you can see it can be oral or written, 5 orals, 5 written, some of Bordeaux, some of Paris, some of Bayonne, and it was some from this is the more ancient one from 1928 to 1990. So let us go to understand what happened in this. So we will hear this pute, and if you can see, we will try to follow the musical line. This prayer, I'm sure that you know the melody of this prayer because it's used today throughout the Sephardic world, with of course some variations. And I propose to you to hear the entire pute, and after I will try to analyze a little every stanza of the pute. Of course, we don't have time to listen all the pute, but it's built on the same patterns. And if you see the melodic profile of this pute shows that all the verses are built on the same patterns. The patterns you can see you have 2 formulas ending on the note E, one based on a descending tetrachord, the other on the final embroidered note, and it's always the same thing. And according to the verses, the descending tetrachord can be preceded by a more or less long prefix. It depends on the text. So if we are now just listen to the first stanza, you can see, you can follow here, it's the pattern here. The note I wrote there, they are always in the same position here. So you can see where are the main notes of the piyut. The little notes, they are not written at all, but here you can really see the profile of the melody. And it will be the same, for example, on the following of on the second stanza of this piyut. It's what is interesting. It's you have at the beginning a soloist, and the choir or chorale is coming here, and before that the entrance of the choir, the pattern, the tetrachord is stretched, and it can be it's a way to prevent the worshippers of the imminence of its interventions. And then the worshippers finish the second part of the last verse before singing the chorus. And after the cantor, of course, take up the chorus before singing the following stanza. So let us listen to this second part, and you will see the stretch. The stretch melodic pattern. And now the last one, and it's as you see, it's very interesting to see that, for example, here you have a real influence of the written of the Western musical notation, because this piyut was harmonized, as you can see here in this version. And now when the faithful are singing this tune, sometimes they sing the lower voice and sometimes they sing the upper voice, but it's the same tunes, and they don't know that it's due to the harmonization of that tune. So it's on this we can more measure the influence of writing on the oral, that is to say, the tonality on the modality. This influence is also noticeable in Gilbert Léon Bordeaux version. Where is Gilbert Léon? It is here. You can see what is very interesting. Yes, here. You can see here that in this version you have a chromaticism, G and G sharp, that comes from the third voices of the choir of Salomon Foy. You can find this chromatism on the score of Salomon Foy. So it is another example of the influence of musical notation and harmonization. Last but not least, and we will hear after that last stanza, you can find some, what I tell, the influence of the North African style of the way of singing now, the Portuguese rite. If you see here, you have a lot of some notes, small notes, a lot of ornamentation that are coming from the Chazanim of North Africa. So we listen just that, and after. The stretch motif before the chorus. So I've not a lot of time, but if you are interested in that, for my PhD, I wrote a book, which is unfortunately only in French, not in English, but you can find all the musical example on all the musical notation of that work. But this musical example of the PHRE Ratson is really emblematic of the changes brought by the Western music system to the Spanish-Portuguese liturgy. In many tunes or piotim, the modality has given way to the tonality. The melodic lines have been modified, in particular with the adding of accidentals. The rhythm have been adjusted in a ratio of proportionality in order to fit into the metric system. However, most of the recitatives, psalmody and other cantillation, which constitute the major part of the services, remain faithful to the principles of a fluid modality based on the sequence of typical melodic formulas. We have, as I told you, no time to develop this point now, because I promised to Reinhard Flender to introduce to speak about the introduction of the organ, and in fact it is really complementary, as you will see. So let us focus on the role of the organ during the role and the controversy surrounding the introduction of the organ in the new French synagogue worship. And you will see it's really linked to the Portuguese community, because the Sephardic Portuguese communities were the first to introduce instrument and not the organ, but they were always very pragmatic, and as we can hear with Edwin Serussi, it's very interesting because they could be considered as reformers of the Jewish worship, and after the reform, they were not following the reform which was introduced at the end of the 19th as the Judaism reforms. First of all, let me give you a brief historical overview of the use of organ in the Jewish worship. Leaving aside the magrefa, a biblical instrument that may have been the ancestor of the organ, but it's absolutely not sure. But the first evidence of the use of a modern organ in the synagogue worship dates from the early 17th century in northern Italy. Between 1628 and 1639, the rabbi and musician Leon from Modena ran in Venice the activities of a Jewish musical association. In fact, there were two musical associations, which one was called Accademia degli Impediti and after Compagnia dei Musici. And these associations were able to mobilize two choirs and instrumentalists, among which one organ, to prepare the celebration of Sivra Torah. Still the 17th century, but in Prague this time, the singer of the prayer Baruch Shamar, in Hebrew Mezamre Baruch Shamar, performs instrumental music in the synagogue every Friday afternoon. Abraham Levy of Amsterdam, who was passing through Prague between 19 and 1724, noticed that the cantors also used organs, cymbals, harpsichord, and string every Friday for the welcoming of the Sabbath. They sang not only lechadodi with these instruments, but they continued to play and sing a potpourri of fine melodies for more than 1 hour. And such practice also took place regularly in the synagogue of Frankfurt, Nikolsburg, and many other towns. This evolution of synagogue musical practices is linked to the evolution of minds and to the idea of Judaism integrated into its time. It's the new Judaism, the Reformed Judaism I was speaking just before. And this trend started in Germany with Moses Mendelssohn, leader of the Haskalah, which is a movement of the Jewish Enlightenment. A translator of the Bible in German, Moses Mendelssohn encouraged his followers to modernize the religious education to study profane fields. At the same time, secular leaders such as Israel Jacobson expressed their will to modernize the worship in the synagogue. Alleviated liturgy, introduction of the organ, recitation of prayer in German, and sermons bearing moral teachings. Thus, in 1801, Israel Jacobson established in Siessen, in Saxe, a school in which 40 Jewish children and 40 Christian children studied together. Then, from 1810, the Jewish community of Siessen was the first one to introduce the regular use of the organ in its religious service. It was followed by the community of Kassel and Berlin in 1815, and of course, Hamburg in 1818. Let us just listen a short example of this new liturgy, which was recorded in Berlin before the World War II. And it's it's no more in Hebrew, it's Von dir, O God. And this prayer came from the Reformed synagogue of Berlin, and she was sung on the melody of a choral by George Neumark during Rosh Hashanah morning service. And the prelude of the organ is taken from the prayer Und seine Teuke by Louis Novandowski. So sorry, I cut because I see that the time is going very quickly. And so it is very interesting, but we will return to this point after. All is mixed. It means between Germany and France, of course, we have the Jewish emancipation of the revolution and the consistorial reform by Napoleon, which arrived after in German and other countries. But in German, it goes faster than in France. I want to speak about the introduction of the organ in the French synagogue, because it's really the subject of the first subject of this lecture. On August 15, as you can read, 1809, a ceremony was organized in the Parisian temple of the street Sainte-Avoye for the celebration of the Napoleon birthday. In reality, you can find the first, we find quite in 1806, mention of official ceremony in this temple, and we can read that the Rabbi Abraham Andrade, it was a rabbi, Sephardic rabbi, a Portuguese rabbi. He sang an hymn in honor of the emperor, and there was an orchestra which performed a symphony by Haydn. But in this second ceremony of 1809 for the emperor birthday, this you have now a Sephardic Razan named Da Costa, which was in charge of the musical organization of the ceremony, which included a non-Razan singer, Abraham Brandoni, and choir boys, accompanied by 2 harps and an organized piano. And this organized piano maybe is an ancestor of the harmonium. In Bordeaux, several testimonies shows that the harmonium was used way before its definitive establishment in the new synagogue inaugurated in 1882. Thus, the party in honor of the King Louis Philippe was celebrated on May 1st, 1833 by a Te Deum with an accompaniment on the organ. The ceremony of the reopening of the temple of Khosrow Street, which was closed for repairs, in 1843, featured an organ played by a man called Mr. Delisle, who was, according to the local consistory, one of the most skilled organ players of the town. So we have a lot of trace of the use of the organ in the French synagogue. And in Paris, there were a lot of debate about the introduction of the organ in the synagogues, very strong and violent since 1844. And this year, a secular member of the Paris consistory asked the chief rabbi Isidore the authorization to use an expressive organ for a ceremony of initiation in which young girls would sing an hymn. But this later refused, arguing that although there is no formal text against the introduction of this instrument in the temple, he believed he must firmly oppose himself to it, since this usage is similar to those of non-Israelite cults, and it's what we call Rukat Goyim. So you have a lot of discussion, and the central consistory promised to take a decision on this matter, but he did not do it in 1844, and but what happens in 1851, when the Paris consistory decided to rebuild the temple of Notre Dame de Nazareth Street, he decided to set an organ in the synagogue, which will be rebuilt. At the same time, the Portuguese Jews of the capital built a new temple on Lamartine Street, which was the first consistory synagogue to have a permanent organ. An article on the inauguration of this temple on June 4, 1851 tells us that the ceremony started with the transport of the Sfarim into the Echal. During this procession, we heard a solo of organ. We noticed that the procession of the Sfarim, the Ashkenazi cantors of the temple joined the choir. We then took out 5 Sepharim. This was accompanied by a solo of organ. And it's very interesting because on this matter, we can notice that the Spanish Portuguese Jews were generally more open to the reforms than the Ashkenazi rabbi. This probably came from the fact that the Sephardic Jews were much more integrated than their co-religionists from Alsace-Lorraine. Another example, but I have to go very quickly. We have a testimony in l'Univers Israélite in 1855 of a worship, and it was written, in the Portuguese temple, things went normally, that is with dignity and a great pomp. The organ played again during the celebration of Rosh Hashanah, but it fasted on the day of Kippur, as even its most passionate supporters would have not want to add anything to the beautiful prayer called Nidri, which was sung in a cappella. And he precised a few months later, the organ is played on Friday night, Saturday, and for holidays on the Portuguese temple, but not in the Ashkenazic temple, Notre Dame de Nazareth. As I told you, a proof of this integration of the organ in the Portuguese worship, Emile Jonas, the music director of the new temple of the Lamartine Street, the Portuguese temple, published in 1845 that collection of Shirot Israel Hebrew songs, comprising 39 liturgical chants with an organ accompaniment. However, it was not until my 1855 that the conference of the chief French rabbis, headed by the chief rabbi of France, Salomon Ullmann, approved officially the use of the organ in all the consistory temples. The Parisian temples of Lamartine Street, Notre Dame de Nazareth, La Victoire, and Buffo were the first French synagogue to be equipped with a permanent organ. And around the 1880s, Bordeaux and Bayonne also installed an organ in their temples. In the Alsace-Lorraine region, a major place of Jewish settlement, the situation was more contrasting. According to the cantor Claude Heyman, the Alsatian Chazanim of the middle in the 19th century possessed musical notions, but scarcely went to the music conservatory. If the Alsatian Jews are very attached to the melody of the prayer or the nigunim that they have heard in the synagogue, they prefer without any doubt the spontaneous fervor of a shaliach tzibur. It means, as we heard before, an amateur cantor, guiding the community singing to a tenor that will transform the synagogue into an opera. Among the opponents to the organ, let's mention the chief rabbi Salomon Klein of Colmar, who firmly opposed himself during the 1856 conference of French chief rabbis to the introduction of the organ in the public cult. We can summarize his argument with the following. To play music during Shabbat or make it play by a non-Jew is a forbidden work. It's Shabbat. And he said this prohibition is expressed by Rambam, Maimonides, and so. On the second point, let us remind that since the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem, it is forbidden to use musical instruments with the sole exception of wedding celebration. It's from Shulchan Aruch. On the third point, the use of the organ in the synagogue faces another prohibition, the one of imitating the habits following by the non-Jews. It's what I mean by Rukat Goyim. It's by Vaikra. This position of Salomon Klein was strongly fought by Gerson Levis in his book Organ and Piyutim, published in Metz in 1859. According to Gerson Levy, the ancient synagogue was, and it's very interesting, this description, the ancient synagogue was a place where each one was master. No taste, no order, no respect, no discipline. The main officer usually had a nasal voice whose trills imitated the snorts of a horse, with a basso profundo vocal accompaniments whose only merits was to counterfeit the growl of an animal hated by the Israelis, it means a pig, and a discording falsetto resembling to the sour and screeching voice of a young girl. The whole assembly made a chorus with this trio, and no one knew the scale. And so you see, it's a real difference between these two point of view, of course, between to keep the old way to sing and the new way, which is really inspired by the opera and the Western musical notation. And he say, Gerson Levy say, listen, reform, according to all the dictionaries, is a re-establishment of the ancient form, the retrenchment of all the abuse that deform it. And he concluded, I do not pretend that the organ is essential to the synagogue or in the church, but I insist on thinking that the rabbi who wishes to prohibit it under the justification of Hukat Goim lies to science and to his conscience. So it was really a lot of discussion about the use of the organ. But finally, in Alsace-Lorraine too, from the end of the 1880s, except in Colmar, the organ succeeded to be established in almost all the important communities of the Alsace region, even on Shabbat and holidays. In small communities, except Brumat, Benfeld, and Celesta, the organ was not played on Shabbat or holidays. The use of the organ continued in France until the late 1970s, but the deportation of a third of the Jews of France and the massive arrival of Jews from the Maghreb, more Orthodox, in the 1950s and 1960s contributed to a gradual abandoning of this instrument, which is nowadays played only in liberal synagogue or wedding or official ceremony. To conclude and to finish this lecture, I propose you to listen 3 examples, short example of this repertoire of players accompanied by the organ, written by Jewish composers of the 19th century, such as Émile Jonas, Samuel Nambourg, or Fromental Alevi, as you know, he was a very known opera composer, or Jules Erloger. The first musical example, Les Alelim, was composed by Émile Jonas and published in his collection in 1854, and it is a wedding cantata for choir, tenor, solist, and organ. And as you can read, the text is provided by the famous writer and Kabbalist Chaim Luzzatto. So let us listen to this example. So I have to cut as we have a little time for the discussion. So let us listen just the second example, Mismor le Sodo, which was composed by Frontal Alevi, and it was composed for the wedding of his nephew and was played in 1858, and also sang for the inauguration of the Temple of La Victoire in 1874. So I have to cut, but you will find this all this example. I will show you after in 2 minutes on our website, so you can listen them. And the last one is Kedusha of Musaf by Jules Hernanger, which died at the end of the 19th. It's an interesting work, and let us listen now. So I have to cut here because it's the end of my lecture, and I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm sorry to be a little long, and I hope that you will have, you don't sleep now. So I finish with that PowerPoint and just want to show you, if you can find all these article, for example, the article about the organ in the Jewish tradition on our website. It's very simple to go there. European Institute of Jewish Music. You have it's in 5 languages. So I guess that you will find the best way to understand. Sometimes everything is not translated, but it's the case for the organ in the Jewish tradition. But it's always translated in, of course, in French, but in English too. And so you can have a lot of details, and you can listen the musical example. You can make a lot of things with that website. So thank you very much, and I will cut the share to to see you. Okay. Okay.
Thank you very much, LV. Well, we got a very nice picture about that there were parallel